Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm honoured to be speaking with Cath Bishop. Cath, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thanks very much. Delighted to be here.
Super delighted and honoured to have you on. Why don't we get started by having you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
So, in terms of my careers, I was an Olympic rower for 10 years, competed in Atlanta, Sydney, and Athens. I had a career then as a diplomat for the Foreign Office and worked abroad as part of that and specialised in conflict-affected areas of the world. And I've now been working for the last 7 or so years in the world of leadership development, working with teams and leaders and trying to get to the bottom of how we can be more effective, how we can get that people side of organisations working much better.
A rich and varied background, Cath. I dare say that your experiences as an Olympian really help you in what you're doing now.
So it's such an intense part of your life to do something that's has that kind of ferocity to it, in intensity. That it shapes you, no doubt it shapes you. I also think that the rest of my life has also been looking back on that time and trying to make sense of what was that about, what was the meaning, because it is so intense at the time. It's really hard to step back and think in a way the bigger picture of what that was for me as an individual, but also the role of Olympic sport, elite sport in others' lives.
You mentioned a term there, making sense making. It's such a pertinent term, certainly in my career as a sports psychologist. And you've written a book, and I dare say sense making was a big part of writing this book. But you can fill us in there. You've written a book called The Long Win: The Search for a Better Way to Succeed, and it's such a pertinent book at the moment. And it's largely about, as we've said there, making sense of success, of this term winning. Following the Olympics is, when did you have this idea of writing a book?
So the book has been going round in different ways in my head, probably almost ever since I retired after Athens. It's taken different shapes, and it didn't get down onto paper until probably I started maybe really writing 3 or 4 years ago. So it is really part of a sense making process, and there's some stuff I've written down that isn't in the book, and that's a good thing for all of us. But it started off as a personal making sense of my journey, and that as I say, that real sort of ferociously intense decade of rowing and living in a world where making a boat go backwards as fast as possible is the most important thing imaginable. And then sort of coming out of that with a mixed bag of results and kind of going, well, how did I do? And, what does that all mean? And I think, even within my career, there was quite a shift from the early days of Atlanta, where, pre-lottery days, women's Olympic sports, not really funded at all. And we were still in a very kind of macho world of sports psychology. I mean, there weren't many sports psychs around at that time. And what sort of access I had, it was all about the will to win and, how tough are you? And, that was the world I sort of came into that was quite a shock to the system. And, I was struggling to succeed, if you like, within that environment. And so, over time, things started to develop. We had better access to a sports psychology by the third Olympiad, and Chris Shambrook, who we both know well, was a big part of sort of helping me to navigate actually a very different, more sophisticated approach to performance. So, within that 10-year period, I'd gone through quite a different view of what winning meant, what it felt like, how I approached it. And then I took that sort of on with me into the other aspects of my life. I didn't really expect to find winning recurring. I thought, I've just got to make sense of this experience and move on. But what happened was I saw it around me all the time, whether it was in diplomatic negotiations or whether it's now working in companies who have the language of let's build winning teams. We want to be number one in the sector. We want to smash the competitors. The language is so prevalent. And that's what's made me become so fascinated with this topic beyond my own story, to look at how it's working in other parts of society as well, to look at how dominant it is still within sport with quite a narrow reference, quite a narrow framework around it, and to think, is it actually helping us?
Well, you open the book. I mean, talking about the beginning with the end in mind. You open the book really at what is, I suppose, the last race. Was it the last race of your career, your
Mm,
competitive career?
mm,
Athens 2004 Olympics. The women's coxless pairs, yourself and Catherine Granger. You're there on the start line. As you say, you're in a boat that you've got to row backwards, maneuver backwards. Um, You've used this word ferocity. You've already introduced us to this notion of, I suppose, this feeling of winning at all costs. Tell me a little bit about that race. Tell me about your last race, the thoughts, the feelings at the beginning of the race, throughout the race, the experience at the end of it.
mm. I mean, I think this race came at a point where I was just beginning to develop this sense of long win thinking, the concepts in the book that start to reframe success. I certainly hadn't cracked it. I was a kind of a work in progress. And there was almost sort of two experiences going on. There was still half of me that had all of this dominant language coming to my head about, there's only one result that counts here. You know what you've got to do. There was a big pressure that no British women had won an Olympic gold medal. Who's going to be the first to do it? That was hanging out there. Can the women do it? There were plenty of people who'd said, oh, the women are no good. It's the male rowers that they're the best, and certainly they were treated the best. And there was lots of things in the culture kind of reinforcing these question marks over us. So there's a lot of that sense that was really pushing for the result. But the other half of my brain was actually sort of was starting to think differently. Starting to think in that performance mindset that I can only do my best. I've got to focus on bringing my best performance, and we'll see what happens down the other end. I've got to find a way to, I must enjoy this. It's a brilliant opportunity. I was at 3 Olympics and I only made the final in the third one. So, already I was super excited that, I was in the top six. I'd got to that point. I was seventh in my first Olympics, a disastrous ninth in the second Olympics. So, for me, it was trying to see that final as an amazing opportunity, as just something, a 7-minute window opportunity to see what I could do, to see how well I could row, to see how I could bring the best of what I'd learned over that decade to, that 2,000 meter course. So I sort of had those two sort of worlds were existing in my brain. I was trying to very much focus on the latter, on that performance piece, and that was what had helped me in the third Olympiad to do better. We had won the World
Mm-hmm.
Championships the year before. It was the first time that the British women had won in that event. So, it was this new way of thinking that was helping me to be more successful than ever. I'd had a year off at the beginning of that Olympiad after the sort of crisis of Sydney, if you like. I'd started my new job. I'd got some perspective. And again, that had helped me to come back and see this as an opportunity, a privilege, something to enjoy. And I knew that life would continue after Athens, and I would go back into the diplomatic service. So there was a different sort of setting in the context of my own mind compared to the two previous Olympics. But there was still no doubt that kind of pressure and expectation from others about what was required and my desire to do my best. So in the race, we'd actually had quite a challenging week. I mean, that's life, isn't it? None of these competitions run in a straightforward way. We'd had challenges the year before when we'd won the World Championships in terms of injuries and weather and sort of a poor first race. And actually, similar things started to kind of happen here. The first race we were hoping to go straight through, win it, and go straight through to the final, but we didn't. We lost to our Belarusian competitors, and they beat us by a long way in that race. So we came in, and for me, starting to feel quite panicky at that point, and a sense of, the two previous Olympic results hung heavy over me. It was baggage. There were lots of people who said she's never going to perform at Olympics. She's been twice before and come nowhere. So, I was carrying that, if you like, that, in the back of my mind, but, trying to distance myself from that and just to be free to give my performance. But that first result was not what we wanted. But, we came in, spoke to our coach, and, got a plan. We had 5 days until the last race, and a real plan of what we were going to change technically in those next few days. Even though you do short sessions, we were always on that, how do we make the next stroke better than the one before? We were particularly looking at sharpening up how our oars entered the water. And it gave us that momentum, if you like, to go, we're going to do some exercises. We're going to go out tomorrow. We're going to sharpen this up, and that will help us get through the repechage to the final. So, that week had become in itself, another kind of mini lifetime of dealing with the challenge and coming up with a proactive way forward. And our coach was very smart, I think, in giving us that, okay, we're going to work on this. We're not just going to keep things bubbling over and go again. We're going to make some changes so that we can improve where we are. And that gave us that much more proactive mindset. People were walking away from us back in the rowing hotel, the support staff, the managers, having had that poor first race. People are going, oh no, there's always this sense, some people are on the up and some people are on the down. There was a sort of, oh no, this doesn't look good for them. But, we were in our own bubble, working on, getting our oars in the water, a frame or two quicker. Not that you can see with the naked eye, but you can see it on that slow motion video camera. And so, we won the repechage. We were getting some good sense of momentum on that technical change. And then, then we found ourselves sitting on the final. So, we'd already been through an experience that week to get there. Our coach, very interestingly, the night before, in our sort of last big, meeting, which is always a sort of, I quite enjoy those, the night before, what are you going to discuss? It's a sort of inspirational moment. It's an emotional moment often. And sometimes coaches give you these big psych-ups. But our coach really just said, ask us a question. And he just said, what does this race mean to you? Which, in hindsight was a brilliant question to ask. It put us in the driving seat to share all levels, emotional. We weren't just sitting there discussing the next day's tactics. We were discussing, the highs, the lows, all that had made us who we were, the athletes that we were, that we would need with us the next day to withstand the challenges that were going to come in the race. So we sat on the start line. We were facing the Romanians. They were our main opposition, as well as the Belarusians who'd beat us in that first race. And the Romanians had been unbeaten that whole Olympiad and had won the Sydney Olympics, except for one race when we had beaten them in the World Championships the year before. So we knew they were beatable, but they were a formidable force because only on that one occasion had they ever been beaten. And so, the race kind of played out. We were fourth a quarter of the way through. We were a fourth halfway through. We were fourth 3/4 of the way through. I wasn't hugely aware of actually the result. I knew we weren't way out front and I knew we weren't way out back, but we were going through our game plan. But, the calls were coming earlier, things we were front loading sort of moves to clearly we needed to do more. Catherine Granger sits behind me in the bow seat. I sort of sit in the front, if you like. And, so she's in charge of sort of calling the tactics and stuff. And, the charge for home, that started earlier as well. And, we made our way through the Canadians. We made our way through the Belarusians who had beaten us earlier in the week. And we overlapped the Romanians as we crossed the line in second place.
How did you feel?
Well, that's the big question that I think has been in my mind ever since, and is a driver for writing the book. And it's a question that audiences ask. And it's a complex question to answer. I mean, I suppose the easy one is exhausted in that immediate moment. Absolutely exhausted. I mean, I always think it's interesting that, we have these, the electronic buzzer goes when you cross the line. It's a really sort of mundane, uninspirational noise that signals the most sort of significant moment in your life. There's this little sort of beep, beep, beep. Gosh, that's determining Olympic champions and Olympic failure and Olympic success. And even though it was close, I was exhausted, my vision was blurring. I knew the second bleep was ours. And as we sort of sat there around, I knew I could see all the other boats except one. One was drifting sort of just ahead of us. I could see the bows of it, but I couldn't see all of it. So, I kind of knew, and I guess I was processing for a while. Very quickly, almost in that sort of car crash mentality of things flashing through your life. We didn't do it. We didn't win. We didn't get that result. That was the aim. But we're on the podium. I've never been on the podium. I've never been near an Olympic podium before. That's good. I wonder what Catherine's going to think. She already has an Olympic silver medal, and mission was to win the gold. I wonder what she's thinking. I wonder what our coach is thinking. He won a silver medal with his Australian crew in Sydney, and a gold previous to that. He wants the mission to be gold. I thought of all my friends, my family in the stands who were going bananas and who just love me and have been with me every step of the journey. And I knew they didn't care and that they loved me and were just kind of going nuts that we were going to be on the podium. And all of that really is a sense making process that takes some time. As soon as we're out the boat, you go to that sort of on the spot BBC interview, and the microphone's thrust under your nose, and again, how do you feel? How do you respond to that? I think I was so deep in that sense making, ferociously going on in the back of my mind now. The ferocity of the race is now this ferocity of sense making, and I just said, it was a privilege to be out there, and it was a thrilling race to be in, and there's no doubt about that. But the sense making continues ever after.
The thesis of the book is questioning our attitude, society's attitude to this notion of winning. And within that rich description you gave us there, Cath, you used words like perspective, do my best. You mentioned going to that last Olympics, having a clarity around life after sport. You mentioned that word meaning that your coach potentially introduced to you just before the race. But then you also mentioned this word ferocity, for instance, and you also talked about a lot of the hard work, the processes put in place leading up to that race. So there's this. There feels like this interesting juxtaposition within this sense making, within this narrative that you've got in your mind, as you're trying to make sense of winning. And in this book, you're questioning our approach, our attitude towards winning. Would all of that be kind of a fair thing to say?
Definitely. In my first two Olympics, I could not have been more desperate to win, and I could not have tried harder.
Mm,
That kind of desire to win, though, I realised was quite irrelevant, and possibly unhelpful to working out how to go faster. It was
right.
distracting me. It was emotionally distracting. It was cognitively distracting me from actually what's required for this performance. One of the really helpful things that when I went back for that third Olympics, having taken a year out and everyone kind of going, yeah, fair enough, you had two shots, move on, sort of, well done, you're not going to make it the big time, that's fine. And then when I wanted to come back, people going, oh, why would you go back? Why would you do that again? And there was so much sort of doubt, if you like, that others expressed as well. And of course, I had some doubts in my own mind. What was so liberating was to have a discussion. And I remember Chris being part of this as well, as saying, what's the worst that can happen? Do you know what? You can come last again. You might come 10th this time. It's perfectly possible. There will be brilliant athletes who train just as hard as you who are going to come 10th and 11th and 12th. So, actually sort of freeing myself from that was a big part of just going, let's explore how we can do this differently. Let's explore how we can have a different experience. And at that point, it wasn't clear I would even be selected again. I had to come in from outside, which was a process I quite enjoyed. Again, just freeing myself from that, almost that desperation to win that had not helped at all. So, I really feel that, we still have so many of those mantras, going on in the coaching world, in the education world, in the sports world, the playground about, second place is the loser, and all of this stuff that I think it's really unhelpful, and it's used as if it's, well, that's what the winners say, and if you doubt that kind of macho narrative, then, oh, you're obviously not cut out to win, and it becomes very self-perpetuating, and I think it's really toxic, and I think it means we lose a lot of talent, and we don't maximize the talent that we have. And we really need to sort of grow up now and value athletes as people, allow them to have a much broader perspective on their career, allow them to make sense of what they're doing, again, it always felt, I mean, I sort of, against the system, some slightly kept studying whilst I was training, because I needed another life. I needed something that was mine. I needed something on those days when the rowing wasn't going well and I was bottom of the rankings. I needed to come home and have something else I could enjoy, and something that, yeah, the coach didn't control and measure and track and trace, and the sports scientist wouldn't pore over. And that was so important to helping me through the challenging times. And we need to make sure that that is a massive priority in athletes' lives. So perspective was critical.
What fascinates me, Kath, is you talk about your first two Olympics and you talk about having a desire to win. Um, and you actually say that this attitude, this approach was actually unhelpful or ended up being unhelpful. And then you talk about in your third Olympics, which you actually ended up winning a silver in, you decided that you were going to have a different experience. You decided that you, alongside your coaches, alongside Catherine, alongside, for example, as you've mentioned there, Dr. Chris Shambrook, who's been on the Sports Site show, you were going to plot a process by which you might have let's call it a more holistic approach to striving to do well. And I think this is important here. Before we get into the meat of the book, I do want to quote from your introduction, because I think this is important to say here. You say, this book is far from a blanket rejection of all winning, competition, or the desire to do our best. It's certainly not about lowering standards. In fact, quite the opposite. It's about challenging the framework we put around winning, competition, and success in order to consider how we might do better. It's about looking at what we normally turn away from or brush under the carpet in order to understand more about those occasions when winning doesn't actually bring meaningful success into our lives. It's only by seeing both sides of the coin, the light and the shade of what winning can mean, that we can redefine success and start to pursue ambitions that could go far beyond simply coming first. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, and we won't unpack all of that, but I do want to go back to the top of that. You're not rejecting this notion of excellence, of winning, of striving to get the gold, of striving to be in the team, in striving to achieve world records. You're simply saying the thesis of this book is, hang on, stop. We're not doing this right. There's a better way.
Absolutely. I think it's really important, and people get sort of defensive and say, oh, you just want to hand medals out to everyone or something. And that's that kind of
Yeah,
simplistic binary thinking.
yeah,
No, it's not about that. It is about the approach we take. You use the word excellence. I think that's a really helpful word. This is about, pursuing excellence, if you like, because that is not only defined by the ranking, the result you get. This is about the pursuit of excellence, in the broadest way as well. What's happened is the sort of sense of, yeah, if you come second but have a brilliant performance, you lose all of the gains and the richness of that wonderful performance. I always think, in the 800-meter race in 2012 in London, David Rudisha broke the world record, and it was a long standing, I think it was Coe's record, wasn't it?
yeah.
And this guy who came second broke it too, and nobody celebrated him. And I thought that was the biggest kind of tragedy, really, because how awesome that, at this point, and I'm sure they needed each other to do it, we lost that kind of richer story of connection and collaboration that was part of that race. Because we just talk about the winner. I think we don't see some of that richer fabric of what goes behind performance, because we just look at that kind of narrow outcome. We also define excellence by a moment in time. So we see it as, crossing the line first, but we then don't connect that. We don't find the meaning in that for the rest of the athlete's life or others in the sport. And that's why I think we have this terrible phenomenon of, athletes winning and saying, is that it? I don't feel happy. I feel empty. I feel depressed, because their training environment has been allowed to become so isolated and detached from the rest of their lives and the rest of, others in their community and their family, their sort of support network. And that's not healthy. And that, I think, is a big part of this, prevalence of mental health issues in sport. So, I think it's really important that we sort of see that broader picture of performance and excellence within that, and don't just determine it by the ranking of where you finish.
Now, you split the book into three parts. And part one, three chapters, very much revolving around the language of winning, the science of winning, and the history of winning. So you're setting the scene here. And in many respects, my interpretation of these three chapters within this first part is the socialization of winning,
Mm,
that language and images and metaphors of winning are everywhere.
mm.
And we really immerse ourselves in this language. And I think what my interpretation of what you're saying is actually, as I say, we use this term socialization. We're socialized into this notion of uh, success is winning and winning is success, and we've got to go out there and win. And there's so much surrounding us that actually drives that feeling, that sensation, that story.
Yeah, and if we're going to change this, I think we need to. I think we need to understand how ingrained it is around us, because we are taking it for granted. We're making assumptions. Winning's good, losing's bad. In a very binary way. Let's celebrate the winners. They're the heroes. And then we sort of start interpreting that in our own lives, which I think is very unhelpful. We start ranking ourselves, and if we're runner up to go for a job, oh, I'm the first loser. All of that sort of stuff in a world where none of us can win all the time, whether it's in the sports world or whether it's within our jobs, getting promotions, whatever it might be, or at school getting grades. So yeah, I think it's become a sort of just that kind of cultural assumption that we really must challenge, because it's not helping us. It's not helping children learning or enjoying sport at a young age. And it stops us seeing the value in what we do. We quickly discard people who are losers, who don't come up with the right answer, who don't come first, when actually they bring something different. They bring a different perspective. They bring that kind of diversity, if you like, of thought to what we're doing. And I think there's a danger within sport. We become very narrow, because we do, we're all kind of competing on these sort of narrow metrics, so we don't allow ourselves to explore sport in different ways. And I think that's part of why sport is losing its appeal to the younger generation. And there is this desire for sports that are more dynamic, that again can be watched in a much more sort of dynamic way. Some of the new kind of winter sports, and the Olympics kind of losing its popularity in sort of viewing figures across the world, I think shows that people are getting a bit turned off from the sort of almost sport becoming about people as machines. No, we want the human side. That's what we love about it. That's what I want us to return to. That's what's going to give us the next competitive advantage, the next marginal gains. They're going to come from the human side, I believe, from the culture, from thinking about how we look after people and allow them to have a longer career. So, yeah, very much I want us to be aware of, the assumptions we make. Sometimes, that sort of science piece that, oh, we're wired to win. That's just how we are. So you better learn how to win. I mean, how many times have we heard that, growing up? And that's just not true. And so I want to really kind of rebalance and sort of put out there that we are just as primed from our history and from our anthropology, from our evolution, to cooperate as we are to compete against others. Again, that original meaning of competere is striving alongside, striving together, and yet we've turned that into striving against others. I think that's a really important kind of difference. We need to go back to doing a lot more striving together in sport, but also beyond.
Well, that's what you lay out in chapter two in the science of winning. Is you note that there's anthropological studies that tell us that cooperation is as important to survival as competition, and I think that's a shift, isn't it? That's a really really interesting notion. I mean, having been being a sports psychologist and being a student of psychology, we learn this notion of competition versus cooperation. But I wonder if competition versus cooperation is wrong, and competition and cooperation is closer to the truth.
I think so, and I think it unlocks a sort of different motivation system, which you will also kind of connect with, I think, through your work. That, if we're in that sort of against somebody else, we're quickly into that threat state, that sort of fear of
Mm.
losing against someone, rather than, again, actually, you need your competitors. In order to get the best performance out of yourselves, those classic Wimbledon finals between Federer and Nadal, neither of them could reach those heights without the other one, and they recognize that. Again, it's that sort of excellence that is achieved through striving together, through really seeing your opposition as a means of improving. And yet, I can remember, again, lots of kind of coaches and people saying to me, don't respect your opposition, don't give them anything, they want to hurt you, you got to hate them. And I think that's so unhelpful. Again, that's, for my mind, that's that sort of old guard, the old way of thinking that still exists. It's still seen as tough, and you've got to be tough to win. And I'm certainly not saying it's easy to win, but I think that gets you into quite a limited space in terms of motivation and in terms of managing pressure, in the heat of competition. And that actually, if we can sort of think much more in that sense of performance as cooperation with your opposing, with your competitor, and in a way, this is one of the things I love about the philosophy of the True Athlete Project that I know you've talked about on your program as well, where they are bringing in that sense, the role of compassion in sport and being very mindful in sport, and again, that respect for your competitor. And I think that's so much more energizing to be in that kind of environment. It's easier to look forward to competition than when you're in that sort of I'm afraid of losing place.
Well, I think what you said is really fascinating because as you're speaking now, I'm thinking of a collegiate mentality, and there are actually pockets of that in adult elite sport at the moment, and have been over the past decade. And you've mentioned tennis there, and Federer and Nadal, and I definitely think Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Andy Murray, as well, and the other players at the highest level of the game. I think they do have more of a collegiate mentality now, or seemingly have done, rather than say back in the 80s, where it all seemed a little bit more fiery and I
Mm,
hate you and you hate me, and we're going to smash the hell out of each other.
yeah.
And even with, I mean, obviously the very sad passing of Kobe Bryant, but Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and other
Mm,
basketball players, and there feels like more, there's pockets of a collegiate mentality trying to push through, and I'm not 100% sure where that's come from, but it hasn't diminished their capacity to compete and entertain and enthrall crowds. It's actually, one could argue, improved things, right?
exactly, and that's really what I want us to kind of study much more and understand, so that we can shift our sporting environments to be much more on run on those sorts of terms. I think the other thing it brings excellence. I think it also brings
Mm.
longevity. I think it's what enables Federer to to go through those challenging periods where he didn't win for a couple of years, or where he had a bit of an injury, because he's got this much more balanced perspective on his career. He's such a kind of role model for me for kind of long win thinking, if you like. He doesn't go out talking about, he's not in a bad mood when he loses. Again, part of that sort of old thinking that you have to sort of beat yourself up. I remember people saying, if you're not sort of really unhappy when you lose, then that's a sign you're not going to be a future winner. So I thought, I better make sure I'm really, really kind of going to always beat myself up when I lose. Otherwise, oh God, I don't want to be seen as not a future winner. I mean, that is such a waste of time and mental energy to be thinking like that. Federer is at such a different level of managing family life, and always seeing that kind of pursuit of excellence in what he does. I remember he was interviewed after losing one of those kind of epic five setters in the Australian Open, and immediately the interviewer, the journalist, kind of said, "Oh, I bet you wish, I can't remember if it was Djokovic or Nadal. No, I think it was Nadal. I bet you wish, he wasn't around, you'd have won loads more." And he looked at her with sort of incredulity that he was trying to disguise, because he's such a lovely gentleman. But you could see that flash through his mind, that sort of, "Oh, really? Is that how you see our sport?" And he said, "Look, maybe I'd have more titles, but I wouldn't be half the tennis player I am now. And that's why I play this sport. And I was like, brilliant. Let's capture that moment. Let's beam it into every sports environment that we've got, because this is what the pursuit of excellence looks like.
The word I'm thinking there, the word that's coming through to me is flexibility. And I'd like to dwell on this a little bit. Flexibility. I'm not talking about physical flexibility. I'm talking about mental
Mm,
flexibility. Because it strikes me what you're saying here is having the capacity, and we can even come back to your own rowing, Cath, having the capacity to look at your opponents, respect them, admire them, potentially learn from what they're doing, or at least guess what they're doing, um, and come back to your own rowing and your own practices and processes and focus on that. Um, that there feels like, and within this notion of a collegiate mentality as well, to have compassion and to potentially be friendly with your rival, to have a friendly and collegiate rivalry, but always coming back to, okay, well, what do I have to do as well? What do I have to do here to beat my friend, my rival, this person over there? With flexibility, cognitive flexibility, thinking flexibility, be important to you?
absolutely. And I think that's what I think of closely when I talk about a constant learning mindset
Mm.
in the long win, the sort of the three C's of clarity, constant learning, and connection. That for me, that concept of psychological flexibility is part of being always able to learn in lots of different ways, to be looking to learn in lots of different ways. Performance is not just the fitness, the technique, it's much more exploring mindset, behaviors, relationships, thinking that much broader world of performance. And it's interesting, when I worked as a diplomat later, I was part of I was director of something called the stabilization unit that was in charge of finding civilians, and preparing civilians to work in really hostile environments, which we're not trained to do. The military know how to manage these environments, but we needed to get much more civilian know-how out to Iraq and Afghanistan at the time, working on things like local governance, building local health clinics. And one of the things we needed to do beyond the technical skills was to help people to be able to thrive in these really high pressure environments. We're not talking sort of the pressure of an Olympic final. We're talking here the pressure of an IED and mortars and all sorts of things in this that make this a very insecure environment. And we did some research with occupational psychologists about what is it that has helped people previously in these environments to do their jobs, or what is it that's made people unable to do them and come home early with high anxiety levels, or whatever might be the cause of a sort of early end to the mission.
Mm.
And they interviewed people who'd worked in these sorts of environments in the previous sort of 10 to 15 years. And the two things that came out as most critical, one was psychological flexibility, that
Mm.
ability that, you're in a volatile world here. What you were working on yesterday, it was blown up overnight. It doesn't exist. And today you've got to find a new way to bring some stability to this situation that is chaotic and, volatile beyond all imagining. Your best tool is constant psychological flexibility. You can't get attached to one person or one project or one way of delivering clean water or uniforms for the police. That is your best tool. So psychological flexibility there was really critical, and I thought it's really interesting because it reminded me of what was required to be able to make decisions in the middle of an Olympic final, to be able to think, how can I get better as a rower without just training harder, because that's not the answer anymore. We're already training 3 times a day, 6 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's now we've got to get smarter about it. The second thing that was critical was to be in a proactively supportive environment. So that's where we come back to this need for, collegiate mentality, for connection, as I call it in the long win, thinking that, that needs to be something that people are looking out for us. It's not a case of, if you've got a problem, come and see me. No, we are looking out for each other. We're connecting at a deeper level and creating that proactively supportive environment when we're under pressure.
Well, you've mentioned this idea of long win thinking, and this is part three, the final part in your book. And as you mentioned there's three C's. This is essentially your philosophy that you're suggesting to your audience here, the reader, in terms of a different philosophy around winning. You mentioned 3 C's: clarity, constant learning, and connection. So, you've given us some ideas of what that can look like and what that means to you in that story there. But let's go step by step here. Tell me a little bit about clarity when it comes to this long win thinking.
So it is about defining success and getting clear about what matters beyond any single result. So getting clarity of what success looks like, it's not enough to say winning a gold medal. It's part of the
Mm.
picture, sure. It's an important part of the picture, but there needs to be more than any single moment in time. Then the question is, why is it important to win a gold medal to you? What will that bring to your life? Why should you win one? Why is it right for you to win one? What are you going to do when you've won one? What will that mean for you? What will you do with that responsibility and opportunity that brings? What will that mean for the rest of your life? We don't have to have fixed answers to these, but this needs to be a constant process of clarifying what matters, understanding that broader sense of criteria that make up success. It's how do you want to go about winning that medal? That is really important, because you know what, that medal might not happen for a whole host of reasons. First, the Olympics might get postponed. It's a whole new reason. You could be ill or injured. You might not get selected. Who knows? Referees, umpires, there are all sorts of uncontrollables that come into this. What you can control is your approach to that aspiration, that ambition. So, how do you want to go about winning that medal? And I think that's really important. And we see, again, some of the costs that we've accrued on the way to winning, fantastic success in Olympic sports, but at some cost. Mental health issues, gymnastics, obviously at the moment, showing us just how wrong environments can, how toxic they can get in the pursuit of winning. And that's for me an area that we must be much clearer about. What's the experience you want to have on the way to winning? Because that matters. There was an Olympic champion from another country in rowing who just, it was so miserable that after she'd won a gold medal, she threw it in the bin. Said, I don't want it because I don't want. It reminds me of this awful experience I've been through. That to me is not acceptable success. Something has gone wrong, and we need to learn from that and think about, it matters the stories we tell about how we won that medal, about the highs, the lows, and what we walk away with for the rest of our lives, the importance of it. So clarifying with broader criteria and over a longer term some different elements that matter beyond a single result.
Sense making at the beginning of the journey.
And all the way along, yes, starting it off, and then it will change as you mature, as you have different experiences, as your sports comes to mean something different to you, perhaps later in your career than at the beginning of the career. So yes, but from the start, having that as an ongoing process, sense making.
I want to win the gold medal. Where does this fit into my life? How does this fit in? What does this mean for the rest of my life? What processes are going to help me to get there, and what consequences are there as a function of these processes? It's really interesting, Cath, as you're speaking there. I'm thinking I was lead psychologist for England Golf for a time, and since the emergence of Tiger Woods back in the late 90s, and his incredible success from a very early stage in his pro career, and one could say throughout his teenage years, and before that, actually, if we're going to define success in a particular way. What we've experienced, say, in golf is a lot of younger people deciding to play full-time amateur golf or turn professional
Mm.
very early, sort of even at 16, 17, 18 years old. And I remember a lot of the conversations, and I still have these conversations, but a lot of the conversations I was having was very much in line with this. I was very concerned that young people were making a choice to dive into a career, or making a career choice based on, well, I love golf right now, and I like the look of what Tiger and other players are doing, so I'm going to give this a crack, and I've got to do it now. because I've got to hit
Yeah.
1,000 golf balls a day, and there was no broadening of the meaning. There was no broadening. There was no sense of what this meant today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, in any stretch of imagination. Whether it was welfare, well-being, financially, resources, anything, and it was incredibly concerning. So that sense-making piece, as you say, at the beginning and throughout, that I love that notion of throughout, Cath, because I think even those people who do a bit of sense making at the beginning possibly don't retain that
Mm.
as the journey continues.
Yes, and that requires a different conversation, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it's about how do we make this an ongoing part of our training? Because the difficulty is, we've got a training program, and it's got, if you're a rower, it's got the ergos, and it's got the weights, and it's got the long 16-kilometer, 20-kilometer, 24-kilometer sessions on the water, and where does sense making fit in? And this again, I think, is one of the sort of traps that we've fallen into. We've sort of had hard training, and then any of that sort of EIS lifestyle advice. Well, you do that in your own time. That's not what I as a coach am about. Well, I think we've got to. I think we've seen enough now that isn't okay anymore. Actually, as the coach, you're developing that whole person, and that's an ongoing shift. And that sense making must also be part of the coach's journey.
Mm.
Why are you doing this obsessive career, and what does this mean for you? And you've won one medal. What does why do you want to do it again? I mean, I think it's also a conversation that's been very absent for coaches and very critical to enable them to adapt, to be flexible about doing things in different ways, and getting more perspective on their own career as well.
Well, your coach's journey is going to make a difference to your journey. His or her behavior, as a
Mm, mm.
consequence of the meaning they're placing behind their journey, is going to influence the interactions between yourselves, and subsequently it's going to make a difference to your journey as well, isn't it?
Massively, yeah, absolutely. And if a coach is under pressure to get a result, otherwise they'll lose their job, then again, we all know what behaviour that drives, and it's not helpful to performance, and it's not helpful to the experience of either the coach or the athlete. And I really think we need to sort of shift. Of course, results play a part, but we need to kind of have a much broader context within which we see those results, and within which we also see the responsibility of how an athlete leads the sport. I think it's so important that we feel that responsibility for the stories they tell, because that's going to determine whether the next generation come along or not. And I believe we're seeing some issues of athlete retention and attracting new talent because of some experiences that are far from what we would like them to be in the pursuit of success. I mean, again, obviously Amy Tinkler very recently coming out saying she would rather not win the medal if she could change the experience that she had as a gymnast. And that's the ultimate, that's where you can end up, and
Mm.
others are sort of at various stages in the road along to that. But I think that's a huge red flag about actually what do we want to create, in terms of the athletes that leave our sport. And if we saw that as one of our metrics of success, what are the stories people tell when they leave the sport, I think we would get some really wonderful sort of qualitative measures of what success might look like, and a sense of, these are the sorts of stories I want people to leave when I've been coaching them or when they've been within my system.
Well, you mentioned there, Kath, Amy Tinkler, who, for people who don't know, has had some challenges with British gymnastics there. You also mentioned the life of a rower, the ergos, the weightlifting, I dare say, the 6 a.m. starts on the Thames in Henley, freezing cold conditions, etc., etc., and equating that to your second C of constant learning. I mean, tell me a bit. We've got the clarity, we've got the purpose, we're sense making, we're making meaning of things, constant learning. Tell me a little bit about constant learning in the long wind thinking.
This is really sort of performance mindset,
Mm.
the performance versus results approach, if you like, that came into that third Olympics for me, where we were just always looking to optimize improvement and not worrying about results. In
Right.
the end, that brings the best results. But actually, on a daily basis, we are successes, improvements. It's not just how fast the boat goes, because actually we might be wanting to make some technical changes. That means you're going to go slower before you then go faster in 2 months' time. Under the old system, I could never make those changes because every day you were fighting to be top of the rankings and you never wanted to let that drop. Otherwise you were in trouble. And the coach would, every day, whether you've had a good day or not, it would depend on literally where you came in those rankings. In that third Olympiad, it was much more about, okay, these are the things you've done well today, and these are the things you need to work on, and this is how we're going to do it tomorrow. And the experience as an athlete could not be more different. To go home, trained as hard in both those scenarios. It was the same toughness of physical training, but the mental experience of the success that day being, yeah, these things are going well and these are things we've got to improve. Not just this is where you are in the rankings. It's phenomenally different. It's very energizing to get up that next day and come back. In the previous, the early Olympiad, it was phenomenally difficult to get up and come back the next day because you just had that fear of, if I did well yesterday, well, what if I don't do as well today? And if I didn't do well yesterday, what if I can't do as well? What if I can't do better today? And that is just a horrible place to be for a sustained period of time with the fatigue, with everything else that's happening at the same time under that tough level of training. So, yes, this is about really focusing on maximizing learning. And again, in a broad set of criterion. So not just the measurable, the easily measurable fitness, techniques, endurance, power, but, the mindset, the relationships, the recovery, all of these aspects. Are we improving these today on what we did yesterday? And, how can we together create gains, across those performance ingredients? Which is, gives you enormous resilience when the results are low. You've still done some stuff well, and we're still going to keep improving. So that reviewing mentality, regardless of the result, we want to go faster next time. If I won, I did some great things in that race, but I also did some things I need to improve. It's exactly the same if I lost. There were some brilliant world-class things in that race. Let's not lose those. We really need to build on those. And these are the other things that we need to shift that are slowing us down. So, that gives you a constancy, a huge resilience, I think, as an athlete, to focus on improving and not go on a roller coaster of, oh, I've won, I've lost, a high, a low, and that's exhausting and detracts from that process of maximizing improvement.
I'm going to say something here that I've actually not said in 2 years on the Sports Site show. Is I would urge coaches listening in actually to click that rewind button, that 30 seconds back button a few times, to go back to the beginning of what you were saying there and listen to it a few times, Cath, because I think what you've said is so pertinent when we're talking about performance. That linguistic dance between outcome and performance is subtle but vital. The capacity, it's a linguistic dance and it's an attentional dance. The capacity to say, okay, look, we're here to try to, let's say in rowing, have the best time, strive to win that gold medal, but constantly coming back to how and lingering on the how, focusing on the how, focusing on that. Hey, look, process is the word that we would use, right? Focusing on that process and have conversations around that process and be very, very mindful of striving to avoid coming back to comparison with others, other boats, coming back to the gold medal all the time and what success looks like from that perspective. Just striving to create richer language, conversations, stronger focus on that process, on the small details around striving to get faster, rather than the speed relative to others and the speed relative to the gold medal. I think that's such an important dance that coaches need to get better and better and better at, and need to help athletes get better and better and better at.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's enormously helpful in sort of those times of turmoil where things aren't going well. That's what gives you that constancy to keep trying and trying different things. It gives you that flexibility to think,
Mm,
well, okay, how can I keep improving? And a year like this where that end result is taken away, nobody can win an Olympic medal. If that's all you're judging success by, then you're going to crash massively. And of the athletes I've spoken to, the ones, who are very medal focused, this has been incredibly hard. Others are thinking, well, what else can I improve? Now I've got this time and I've got this different way of training. What else can I improve? And some of that is also sorting out the rest of my life and spending some time in different ways. Some of that is connecting back with the grassroots sports club that I had no time to maintain a connection with, but I feel, I really want to kind of be back supporting them, and sometimes it's okay, now I've got some time to do some slightly different training that there normally isn't scope for, that will improve my balance or that will improve, my agility. So, again, I think it's so helpful in difficult times. And, what athlete doesn't go through difficult times, to be just thinking, do you know what, I'm improving, I'm making some improvements. That's kind of what that mentality was that helped us from that, first race to the last race in Athens, where the first race didn't go well. What did the coach give us? He gave us momentum of these. We're going to work at putting our ore in the water two frames not visible to the human eye quicker. It was giving us a way of creating positive momentum again, rather than thinking, oh my God, momentum stopped. That's not what we planned to happen. It's going wrong. So, I think it's so important to, enjoying, if you like, the journeys we're on when difficult things are happening. And, I see exactly the same in businesses where, sales results have been wiped away for 2020 and teams are going, oh God, does that mean there's nothing positive about this year?
mm.
We failed as a team because that's what we judged success by. That's madness. That's absolute madness. And what will help you to come through this difficult time is adapting and thinking, okay, what else can we do? And that's what we need teams to be thinking, whether it's sporting or business. Okay, so now how do we achieve that same impact? If I've made sense and I've got a bigger sense of purpose, then I can think, right, I've got to find a different way to achieve that now. If I don't have that bigger purpose, that bigger sense of why I'm doing this, it's really hard to shift track when that very obvious goal, that outcome, it just isn't possible at the moment.
Well, you've neatly linked constant learning with clarity. And as you're speaking there, I'm also considering the link between constant learning and performance, in the sense that when when your mind is attuned to that constant learning as an athlete and as a coach, and together as an athlete coach relationship, when your mind is attuned to that constant learning, um, in many respects, you're creating the kind of performance mentality you want on that start line. One that focuses again on this word process, the little things that are going to help you to make the boat go quick, if we're talking about rowing there. Um, the notion that ultimately being a great competitor in the performance arena is a sense of control the controllables. All I can do is execute my race plan to the best of my ability. I can't do any more. Rationally speaking, I can't do any more. And in many respects, your approach in this book to what constant learning is. Yes, we could get into the nitty gritty of, some coaches will say, well, learning activities are different to performance activities. And absolutely, on occasion, they are. But there's also a strong link between a learning mentality and a performance mentality, as in, let's focus on the process. Let's have a well-defined process. Let's focus on that. Ultimately, hey, what happens after that? We can't control that. We know what we want. But if we can vociferously nail down what we want to do, how we're going to do that, go and do it, let's see where the outcome takes us. That's all we can do, Cath.
I know, and it's so much more liberating to sit on the start line with that as the, let's see where this takes us. Let's play out. Again, it's a more playful place, which we know is going to help us get much more into a sort of flow state, into a real sort of absorption in what we're doing, that process. And yeah, that's to sit on the start line with, tremendous nerves, but to have that in your mind, it is such a great place to be, compared to sitting on the start line thinking, I've got to win.
Yeah. Let's finish off today by talking about your third C, connection. Tell me a little bit about that and its relationship with long win thinking.
So it's the glue. It's again easily connected to clarity and constant learning. It's the human relationships. It's really valuing those, investing in those, seeing those as an important measure of success, both along the journey and actually at the end. Again, some of that isolation that we see in champions who've won but sort of just feel alone with it is because we've sort of lost that sense of connection to others. And part of the sense making is who else is on this journey with you, who's sharing this, who will you share this with afterwards, who are you sharing this with now. We can't work in teams without that much deeper connection that enables us to achieve peak performance, where we're almost telepathically understanding what's in others' minds. We need that deeper connection, not just, oh, do you want to win, I want to win, let's go. That's not enough. We need to know why we each want to win, because we've probably got some really different drivers and some different backgrounds. And once we can harness that, tap into that, then we understand why we also react differently to different situations. And we can really sort of start getting the best out of each other and drawing on the different perspectives we bring. So that deeper level of connection, it's fundamental to everything we do. We can't succeed on our own, in any walk of life, in any sport, even if it's a so-called individual sport, it doesn't exist without a team. And it's valuing that, putting that as as a priority, not as a byproduct or if you've got time. No, this is actually all the time. This is one of your measures of success, if you like, about why and how you are approaching sport. And to be really, deepening those connections with people around you. And I can remember at the beginning of my career, not listening to all the advice, listening to the sports psychs, or well, actually they weren't there at the beginning. The physiologists, the
Yeah.
coaches. Actually, there weren't a lot of sport people there at the beginning, to be honest. But I can remember sort of just absorbing what was taken in. But in that third Olympiad again, then I was in a place of connecting, thinking, I've got no idea what the physiologists have done by training. I want to get curious about that. I want to really understand the graphs you're showing me, because I don't. It's not my background. I don't have a training in this. How can I really understand sort of how nutrition works? I hear you telling me to eat more spinach, but I need to sort of understand that at a deeper level for me actually to shift my behavior and do this differently. So again, that was a huge part of wanting to kind of connect that, and that sort of going back to have one more try at the Olympics with coming up with different relationships, coming out with a different sense of connection to my life thereafter as well, that this was going to be part of and not isolated from, regardless of the result.
It's really interesting. Something you mentioned there was when you started out on your journey in rowing, there weren't as many people around you, experts, if you like, around you, and obviously that those personnel grew over time as sport became, I suppose, in inverted commas, more serious, and different roles and responsibilities were created, and in many respects, quite rightly. I mean, experts bring fantastic knowledge to the table, but it's the first time I've really, I suppose not the first time. Let me take that back slightly. That connection between those staff is vital as well for you, the athlete, because for them to be able to function optimally for you requires them to connect, them to work cohesively together, alongside working cohesively with you, connecting with you. So that's one thought I had that maybe I can get your quick comment on, and
Mm,
the other thought, I work heavily in football, soccer, and I think this is one of the big challenges in British soccer, British football, is connection between coaching staff and players, and between players themselves. And we've created, in my opinion, this very, I don't love this term, but I'm going to use it, Kath, dog eat dog environment between players. There's a squad of 25 players and everybody's vying for their position. And
mm,
the culture at the moment, there's not enough solutions as to how to deal with that, because then we lose social cohesion, we lose task cohesion as a consequence of that dog eat dog culture, and it seems enormously counterintuitive. So just a
mm.
couple of viewpoints on connection there, and really just agreeing with you how important it is.
Yeah, they hugely resonate. We come back to that point about is competition striving together or striving
Yeah.
against? And that word, whether we think together or against, drives completely different behaviours and I believe completely different
Mm.
performance. So, how that's framed, and to be conscious about that. There's almost this assumption that if you're being competitive against someone, it's good. And we need to challenge that and think, well, is it actually helping performance? Is it actually helping the team performance? Is it helping us develop? Is it helping us learn? Or is it actually holding us back from doing other things that would move us on? So, I definitely think, yeah, the sort of sense that all competition is good and that somehow shows you're tough or you're a competitor. I mean, just that language turns me off completely, because I think it's contrary to real performance thinking. And, I think there's the point about connecting with experts. I see a real gain that we could make where, rather than the sort of narrow sense of, you're just here for biomechanics data and you're just here for sort of sports psych around the kind of performance goals. No, we're all here to develop each other, to make sense together
Mm.
of the journey we're on. And actually, that biomechanics specialist, that they also should be looking out for the welfare of that athlete and considering that person that they're working with. Again, the sports psych. I think that in some cases, I know some psychologists have felt they've, been kind of forced to almost narrow what they work on in terms of helping an athlete just achieve performance goals, rather than explore, the much wider psychological side of, the purpose, why you're doing this, those kind of deeper world which you're all, experts in. So I think there's a lot that we could do by having different conversations in high performance environments that we've thought are not tough or strong or competitive, and actually we're losing competitive advantage by not bringing in these kind of discussions about culture, about vulnerability, about compassion, about support, all of these different aspects that are a key part of everyone that in that environment, support team, coaches, athletes, having the best experience and then thriving in order to deliver the best performance.
Well, Kath, talking about connection and cooperation, I could probably talk about this with you all day long, but I'm mindful of your time, and that's an absolutely fascinating conversation. And there's probably so much more that we can talk about, and I'm going to kick myself coming off this call and think, oh, I wish I'd asked Kath about this and that. But I hope we've done your book some justice. It's an absolutely fantastic and fascinating read, and it what I love about it, Kath, is it it's challenging. It's challenging the pervasive mindset that we have to adopt a certain win at all costs mentality, or certain mentality around winning, to be able to win and to be able to experience sport at the very top level. And I would absolutely admit myself, it's only in the last couple of years that I've started to broaden my beliefs around this, and it's people like yourself. And I had a wonderful conversation with Elliot Neal, who you'll probably know from the EIS and on the Sports
Mm.
Psych Show, and Dr. Chris Shambrook, who was on episode 2 of the Sports Psych Show. I have great conversations with him, and just broadening that interpretation of what winning is and what it should mean to us, and how to do it. In a healthy, adaptive way, and that we can do it in a healthy, adaptive way. I think that the final thing I want to say, and I'll let you have the last word, but winning in a healthy, adaptive way, I think, is vital. What's your final thoughts on that?
So I completely agree. It's time for change. I mean, it has taken me many years and some distance from sport in order to really understand it, think about it, challenge myself, discuss with others. But I really believe it's time for change in order to get to that next level of performance and to reach the greater potential of what sport can mean for us at elite level, but also for the spectators, for everybody involved in it, the volunteers, the support team. We're not really optimizing what sport could bring to our lives as individuals, as society. So let's redefine success and think about the long win.
Well, on that basis, long win thinking, the long win book. Where can people get hold of it, Kath?
So it's published on the 13th of October. It's available everywhere that you would normally buy a book. So you can order it through bookshops. It's on Amazon, Waterstones. You can go through hive.co.uk to find your local bookshop if you want to order online, but with benefits to your bookshops. So yeah, you can find it anywhere you would normally read it.
And how can people find you if you want to be found, that is?
Sure. I mean, I've really enjoyed the opportunity for some different conversations through this book, through the connections that it's brought me, and that's been a real kind of thrill that I couldn't have predicted. So I have a website, www.cathbishop.com, and I am at the Cath Bishop on Twitter, also on LinkedIn. So please do reach out with comments, thoughts, feedback.
Brilliant. Cath, thanks so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Site Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.